Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library. And I have a great story to tell you. Tonight, we're going to follow thousands of years of human history and travel to many places around the world. Textiles are among the most important early inventions of mankind. They are not only useful, especially for clothing, but they also reveal social customs, culture, aesthetics, and technologies. Generation after generation, millions of our ancestors have worked at pressing or spinning fibers, at weaving or knitting, at painting or embroidering. We will talk about many different types of textiles, where they came from, and what they were used for. From the most current ones like cotton or wool to the most precious silk. Textiles are highly controlled creations, and they are often in this gray area between crafts, decoration, and art. As you may know, the distinction between crafts and fine art or decorative arts is a modern concept. For much of human history, artisans and artists were the same. And even today, it is always enlightening to think of artisans as artists and vice versa. To really understand what they do, there is always a combination of physicality and emotion or intellect. But first, allow me to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project. Get more of it and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. Our least expensive tier is $3.50 per month, but it doesn't mean you will get less. We let people contribute what they wish to or can, and everyone gets everything that is on our page, because the world is a better place when the sun shines for everyone. You will gain access to several exclusive episodes, which we add one every month, and also all our episodes with or without background sounds. We offer advance releases to our Patreons as well. We have added links to Patreon as well as links to different streaming options, which may be better suited for you. You will find these links in the description of the episode. Now, before we dive deep into the story, let's take a moment together to prepare for our journey ahead. If you'd like, gently close your eyes and let your daily concerns drift away. Find a position that feels natural and cozy. Perhaps make small adjustments until you're perfectly comfortable. Now, draw in a deep breath, a nourishing one. And as you release it, do it softly. Notice how your body responds. Feel the warmth flowing from your shoulders down through your neck, melting away any tension. Let your facial muscles become soft, your jaw loose, your fingers naturally open, and your legs completely at ease. As you settle into this peaceful state, my voice will be your gentle companion as we begin our exploration together. When did mankind start to wear clothes? Long before textiles were invented. In fact, research indicates that humans may have begun wearing clothing as far back as 100,000 to 500,000 years ago. Probably animal fur and skin, possibly clothing made of leaves or other plant material. We don't exactly know. The most ancient sewing needles that have been discovered have been dated to at least 50,000 years ago. And we're going to see that textiles appeared tens of thousands of years later, from 20,000 to 30,000 years ago. We have figurines found in Europe that depict clothing pieces. There are skirts made of twisted fibers, hats or caps, belts. Archaeologists also found various artifacts used in textile making, like weaving sticks. The oldest of them have been dated to more than 7,000 years ago. It is unclear exactly when the transition to actual textile happened, as opposed to skins sewn together, that is. But the first type of textile was probably felt. Felt is not a woven fabric. It is obtained by matting and pressing natural fibers together. The ancient process only works with animal hairs. Hot water is applied to 2 layers of animal hairs, and then when the fabrics are agitated and compressed, they hook together into a single piece of fabric. It doesn't work well with vegetable fibers because they don't have this property to curl and form a single piece when they are soaked in hot water and pressed. This technique probably appeared in Central Asia, and it is still used by nomadic tribes to make clothing, boots, or rugs. It is a very useful material because it is water repellent, doesn't burn easily, and absorbs sounds. Actually, even though it is not a very common type of textile, you may own some. It is used to cover pool tables, bridge tables, game tables in casinos, or as a damper in many musical instruments like pianos. About 8,000 years ago, woven textiles appeared around the world, and evidence of their presence can be found on every continent, at least in regions that were dry enough to preserve them. This includes the Middle East, China, India, North Africa, and dry parts of America, especially Peru. It is less certain when textiles were first made in the regions around the equator or the tropics, because all textiles are relatively fragile, and they survive thousands of years only in the driest regions. However, it is likely that they spread all around the world during the Neolithic period. We know that this period was rich in migrations that propagated innovations at a very slow pace compared with our modern standards. It took centuries or thousands of years, but this is still not that much relative to mankind's history. It seems the first fibers used in woven textiles were botanical, and the first one was flax, also known as linen. Long before cotton, flax was cultivated at least 8,000 years ago in the Middle East. It is a crop that serves for food. The seeds are edible and give linseed oil. And the stem gives fibers that are very strong, stronger than cotton and relatively smooth. From the Near East, the cultivation of flax spread to Europe, India, and China, where it was present about 5,000 years ago. Flax was cultivated extensively in ancient Egypt, for example, where it was used for clothing, sails, and to bury people as a shroud or to wrap mummies. In the entire Mediterranean world and in Europe, people relied mainly on linen for plant-based textiles. They also used a lot of wool. We'll talk about that later. But at the time, cotton was very rare in this part of the world. The Phoenicians traded Egyptian linen throughout the Mediterranean. The Romans adopted it, and several centuries later, in the European Middle Ages, it was still a very important fiber. In Europe, the industry was centered on Flanders. The crop was cultivated in northern Europe and then processed and turned into cloth, including dyed cloth, around Flanders and exported via medieval trade routes. If you are interested in how dyes were produced and how the taste and color moved in this period, I made a story called The History of Colors. You can find it in my library. Linen dominated vegetable fibers in the West until the 18th century, when cotton replaced it. At first, cotton and cotton fabrics mainly came from India. But as cotton products grew in popularity, Europeans took control of this industry. Cotton was introduced to their colonies in America as a good cash crop. They imported the raw material from America and India and produced textiles in a region centered on England and the north of France. We will return to the history of cotton a bit further down the road. There were several steps involved in the production of textiles, whether with linen, cotton, or wool. They haven't changed that much, even though they have been industrialized. And they are still practiced to make fabric with natural fibers. First, the raw material must be prepared. Fibers are washed in a first cleaning phase. Then comes carding and combing, which are methods to disentangle and straighten out fibers. Once the raw material has been prepared, it is turned into thread or yarn by spinning. Spinning is the action of pulling and twisting the fibers. It could be done manually with a sort of spike. This is probably how it began during antiquity or the Middle Ages. It is a bit unclear. The spinning wheel was introduced first in India and the Islamic world. From there, it reached Europe and became widely used. The spinning wheel increased productivity and helped produce regular yarn. It was fundamental in the textile industry prior to the Industrial Revolution, when it was replaced with other machines. After spinning, the yarn had to be woven, which was done on the loom. Threads were arranged vertically as a warp, either from the top or the loom when it was vertical, or from one side. The weaver then passed the horizontal thread, known as the weft, through the vertical threads using a shuttle. To ensure that the fabric remained tight, the weft thread was pushed every time it passed through the warp. After hours, days, or even weeks of work, a piece of cloth was obtained. However, there were finishing stages for woolen cloth. The first was fulling, which involved soaking the cloth in water and then beating it to tighten the threads. Then came dyeing and eventually printing. Printing and dyeing were the significant advantages of cotton because this fiber works very well with color. Cotton fabrics largely replaced linen for the most part in the West, but cotton also has its own ancient history. In the ancient world, cotton was produced and used in two main centers, India and America. The oldest known cotton fabric, dating back 8,000 years, was found in Peru, indicating that this is where the plant was first domesticated. Cotton textiles also existed in North America, with evidence of cultivation 5,000 years ago in Mexico and Arizona by pre-Columbian Native American peoples. The other historical region of origin of cotton, where it was likely domesticated independently from the Americas, was India. The Greeks and later the Romans were aware of cotton, considering it an important luxury item that arrived through ancient trade routes like the Silk Road. They desired cotton for its smoothness and lightness, considering it superior to wool or linen. Cotton had the ability to retain vibrant colors, unlike wool, and the only fabric considered even better was silk, which was also an important luxury. Egypt had some cotton cultivation in antiquity, but it never became prominent or replaced linen and wool. Cotton became slightly more common in Europe during the Middle Ages, although it remained relatively rare. It was introduced to Spain and Sicily through the Muslim conquest in the south of Italy. These regions were later recaptured, leading to the development of cotton manufacturing in the north of Italy and Flanders. The raw material was brought through Venice, as it was one of the products Venetian traders acquired during their travels to the Near East. They also imported a significant amount of ready-to-sell Indian fabrics that had passed through Persia and other parts of the Middle East. During that time, the fine Indian fabrics were considered superior to anything produced by the European industry, and this dominance persisted until the 18th century. India exported textiles to China, the Muslim world, and Europe, although it took some time for Europeans to realize their origin. One particular type of cotton fabric, muslin. It was named after the city of Mosul in Iraq, where Europeans believed it originated. However, it actually passed through Iraq and came from various production centers in India. The largest production center was located in the eastern part of India, specifically Bengal, around the city of Dhaka, which is now the capital of Bangladesh. However, there were several other production centers in India as well. In the 16th to 18th centuries, the rulers of India actively promoted the production of cotton and cotton textiles, leading to significant growth in the industry until the 18th century. Chinese and Muslim traders were attracted by Portuguese, Dutch, English, and French buyers who sailed to India via the southern route around Africa and gradually gained control over the trade in Asia. It is estimated that in the 18th century, Indian textiles were the most important manufactured goods in global trade. These textiles could be found from America to Japan, posing a challenge for European trading nations who had little to offer in return. India was largely self-sufficient, and there was low demand for European products. As a result, European countries had to export significant quantities of precious metals, such as gold and silver, to pay for Indian products. This circumstance prompted European countries to make efforts to develop their own cotton industry. During this period, there was an increasing import of raw materials and the development of the printing industry with new patterns. An example of such a pattern is toile de Juillet, which emerged in the 18th century. Toile de Juillet consists of a repeated pattern on a plain background, often white with the pattern itself in color. Traditionally, these patterns depicted pastoral themes or arrangements of flowers. Although originating in Ireland, they gained immense popularity in France and the United Kingdom in the 18th century, leading to exponential growth in production in these two countries. Toile de Juillet patterns were commonly used to cover furniture, walls, or curtains. The name Toile de Juillet refers to the cotton from Juillet, a city near Paris. The increasing demand for cotton led to the development of cotton cultivation in colonies, particularly in the West Indies, where the plant was already present before the arrival of Europeans, similar to other colonial crops such as sugarcane, coffee, or tobacco. The establishment of plantations and the widespread cultivation of cotton made it one of the main colonial products in the 18th century. However, this had significant and far-reaching consequences in other parts of the world. Most notably, it further stimulated the demand for African slaves. While the practice had begun earlier, cotton alone was responsible for the deportation of hundreds of thousands, potentially even millions, of African people to the Caribbean and later to the United States. In the years following independence, the United States was not a significant producer of cotton. In fact, it was quite marginal. However, in the 19th century, cotton production in the U.S. witnessed a dramatic and rapid growth. By the middle of the 19th century, states such as Georgia, Missouri, Louisiana, and Alabama were major cotton producers, despite having relatively small populations. A notable aspect of this population was that the 50% of it consisted of enslaved individuals, many of whom were born in America, but whose parents had been brought to the country 1 to 2 generations earlier. Another consequence of Europeans and later Americans assuming control over the cotton industry was the decline of India's textile industry. While it was not completely ruined, European production became cheaper and caught up in terms of quality, thereby accelerating the Industrial Revolution in Europe. The United States emerged as a significant provider of raw cotton and displaced India as a primary exporter of this commodity. The UK and France were the two main clients of American cotton. During the Civil War, the Confederacy attempted to coerce these two countries into intervening against the North by imposing an embargo on cotton. This strategy, known as cotton diplomacy, ultimately proved ineffective. However, the fact that such a measure was tried demonstrates the critical importance of the cotton supply to the textiles industry of these countries during that time. Silk is an ancient textile fiber that originated in China during the Neolithic period and has a history of approximately 6,000 years. Initially, silk production remained confined to China for several millennia until the opening of the Silk Road in the centuries BC. Even after the Silk Road facilitated the spread of silk products to regions like the Near East, India, and the Mediterranean, China maintained a monopoly on silk production for another 1,000 years because the knowledge of silk production remained exclusive to China. While silk is commonly thought as a luxury textile today, known for its fine quality and high value, it was more widely used and accessible several centuries ago. However, the mainstream popularity of silk declined as the price of cotton dropped and synthetic fibers like nylon emerged as cheaper alternatives. Silk is produced by the silk moth, specifically during its caterpillar stage when it forms a cocoon made of a thin yet strong thread. This delicate and shimmering thread allows for the weaving of lightweight and lustrous textiles. According to a legendary tradition in China, the origin of silk is attributed to an accidental discovery. It is said that a silkworm cocoon fell into the teacup of an empress. As she attempted to retrieve the cocoon, the thread started unraveling. Intrigued, she came up with the idea of weaving the thread and was amazed by the resulting textile. The empress then observed the life cycle of the silkworm and proceeded to instruct others in the art of raising them, a practice known as sericulture. The knowledge of silk production was closely guarded in China, and it wasn't until the middle of the first millennium AD that silk started to be exported. However, its true origin remained a mystery to outsiders. The Romans, for example, were confused about it. While they knew that silk came from silkworms, they believed that the caterpillars directly wove the cloth on trees, similar to how spiders create their webs. Silk created a significant frenzy in early Chinese high society due to its qualities of lightness, shimmering appearance, and apparent perfection. This led to a restriction on silk usage, which lasted for approximately a millennium. Only members of the imperial family and a select few individuals of high rank were granted the privilege of wearing silk as a symbol of distinction. Certain types of silk possess a greater sheen than others, and this attribute is a result of the structure of the threads. The prism-like shape of these threads cause the light to refract from every single angle, creating the shimmering appearance. Over the course of centuries, the privilege of wearing silk was gradually extended to a wider circle of people, but it still remained prohibited for the masses. In fact, even touching silk was forbidden for peasants, who constituted the vast majority of the population. However, this prohibition was lifted under the Qing dynasty in the 17th century. Silk had applications beyond clothing and was also used in the creation of paper. Paper itself was another Chinese discovery and could be made from various raw materials such as bamboo, straw, linen, and even silk. During the 2nd century BC, under the Han Dynasty, silk paper production began, marking the emergence of the first luxury paper. Additionally, silk became more than just a material during this period. It functioned as a form of currency due to its high value. Silk could be used to pay high-ranking government officials, reward wealthy citizens, or serve as a tribute. The length of silk fabric became a monetary standard in China, comparable to the weight of gold. Silk had already reached other parts of the world even before the opening of the Silk Road, with regular trade routes established for the distribution of this prized product. Late ancient Egyptians, as well as the Greeks and Romans, had knowledge of silk even before opening the Silk Road in the 2nd century BC. Although small quantities of silk managed to leave China in earlier centuries, the Silk Road facilitated the availability of silk in much larger quantities. The fame and high prices of silk posed a threat to the Chinese monopoly over its production, prompting the Chinese to take measures to protect their control. An imperial decree was issued, condemning to death anyone attempting to export silkworms or their eggs. However, the Chinese monopoly over silk production was eventually broken. In 300 AD, the Japanese mounted an expedition that captured silkworm eggs and took young Chinese girls who were forced to teach them the art of sericulture. The Japanese refined their techniques over the ensuing centuries, leading to the widespread practice of sericulture in Japan on a larger scale. In the West, the first successful attempt to produce silk outside of China is believed to have taken place in the 6th century in the Byzantium Empire. Monks managed to smuggle silkworm eggs hidden in rods of bamboo, establishing a silk industry in Byzantium. The Arabs also contributed to the spread of silk production, introducing it across the shores of the Mediterranean, similar to their dissemination of cotton. The development of silk production outside of China did not lead to the demise of the Chinese silk industry, which had accumulated several thousand years of experience and continued to produce the highest quality silk fabrics in the subsequent centuries. However, the techniques of silk production eventually spread to the rest of Europe following the start of the Crusades in the Middle Ages. A new production center emerged in the north of Italy, which was further strengthened after the Fourth Crusade. This event resulted in the sack of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and the destruction of the silk industry in Byzantium. As a result, hundreds of skilled weavers relocated to Italy. The rise of the Ottoman Empire in the East had an impact on European access to imported silk, either reducing availability or making it more expensive. This gave a boost to Italian silk production, allowing it to prosper. The long tradition of fine textiles in northern Italy began in the Middle Ages and was made possible by the concentrated trading cities such as Venice and Genoa. These cities imported knowledge and new materials, benefiting from a well-populated area with wealthy patrons who formed a solid client base for luxury textiles and goods in general. By the 15th century, Chinese silk continued to make its way to Europe, but by this point, over half of the production had shifted to Europe, primarily in Italy. However, in the 16th century, the European center of silk production moved across the Alps to the city of Lyon in France. France faced a similar issue that the Italian city-states had experienced before, with a trade deficit resulting in a significant transfer of precious metals to Italy, caused by the importation of Indian and Chinese products through the Silk Road. To address this problem, kings attempted to develop a national silk industry. The country successfully established itself as a leading consumer of silk during that time. The combination of France's large population, a growing upper class with a willingness to spend on luxury goods, and the rise of fashion as a cultural phenomenon contributed to this achievement. It is important to note that for centuries, the demand for precious imported goods had primarily originated from a small group consisting of nobles and wealthy bourgeoisie. In the 16th century, the demand for luxury goods, driven particularly by royal courts across Europe, reached unprecedented levels. Prominent courts such as those of Henry VIII in England, Francis I in France, wealthy Italian city-states like Venice, Florence, and Rome, along with Madrid, witness courtiers and the high aristocracy spending more than ever on clothing and jewels. It was not uncommon for individuals in these circles to spend several times the income of an average person on a single outfit that would be worn only once. The high demand for luxury products led to the emergence of a luxury goods industry in Europe, with Italy and notably France playing significant roles. The strong and constantly changing fashion trends continuously renewed the demand for luxury goods. Consequently, Lyon became the new European capital of the silk trade in the 16th and 17th centuries. Lyon achieved this position by being granted a trade and manufacturing monopoly and by successfully creating new patterns and styles that were used in high-end clothing, tapestries, and furniture. In the 17th century, the city of Lyon had over 10,000 looms dedicated to silk manufacturing, which supported approximately one-third of the city's population. This was a significant industry for pre-industrial times. However, with the onset of the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century, the focus of textile innovation shifted primarily to the cotton industry, particularly in the United Kingdom. As I mentioned previously, cotton became a major commodity during this period, benefiting from productivity gains in spinning due to the new machines. Silk, on the other hand, remained somewhat on the sidelines. Being a thread already, silk did not benefit from the same advancements in spinning as cotton did. Furthermore, silk retained its status as a luxury product, while the price of cotton cloth was dropping, making it more accessible to larger markets. Weaving precious silk fabrics, which often incorporated silver or gold threads, involved a highly delicate process. It was done in small quantities and couldn't be fully industrialized. Thus, even though the Industrial Revolution, when textile production was undergoing significant changes, silk production remained more artisanal and limited in scale. During the Industrial Revolution, despite the emergence of giant factories and mass production in various industries, silk production remained semi-industrial. Innovations such as the jacquard loom, which used punched cards to automatically weave patterns, brought some advancements to silk weaving. This loom is notable as a precursor to the computers of the 1800s. The system of punch cards, although limited, served as an effective form of programming and continued to be used in computing until the 1970s. However, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, European silk production began to decline and never fully recovered. Silk production was highly labor-intensive, and despite innovations and productivity gains, they couldn't fully compensate for the rising costs. Unlike the decreasing cost of raw cotton, the cost of silkworm cocoons continued to rise. Additionally, with the availability of cheaper and visually appealing cotton products, the demand for silk decreased significantly. In the 19th century, importing silk from China or Japan became more attractive due to the faster transportation enabled by the opening of the Suez Canal. As a result, silk production in Italy or Lyon became marginal. Today, silk production still exists, but is limited to producing high-end products or fabrics used in the restoration of antique objects, such as tapestries or silk-covered seats. As a counterintuitive outcome of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, China regained its position as the largest and most dominant producer of silk in the world. This status as the primary producer of silk continues to be held by China to this day. We are going to talk about one last very important type of fiber, wool. Wool has its own significant history in the realm of textiles, while felt, which is made of animal fibers pressed rather than woven, is recognized as the oldest known form of textile. Different animals produce various types of fibers despite their similar chemical compositions. Wool, distinct from hair or fur, grows from specialized cells called follicles in the skin. These follicles can produce fibers with different characteristics, including diameter, crimp, and elasticity, which can vary significantly. Wool, being finer than hair and fur, possesses a higher degree of crimp. For instance, a fine wool like merino can have up to 100 crimp waves per inch, whereas hair lacks crimp entirely. Spinning hair into yarn would be challenging since individual hair fibers do not easily attach to each other. In contrast, wool is easy to spin into yarn due to the presence of little crimps that help the fibers hold together. Wool exhibits a wide range of characteristics, including diameter, crimp, lipid content, natural color, and the percentage of fibers of different sizes within a fleece. Furthermore, wool can come from various animals, including sheep, goats, such as cashmere and mohair, rabbits, such as Angora, and camelids, including alpacas. The diversity of wool is attributed to the numerous variables involved, making it the most diverse type of natural fiber. It is also strongly associated with domestication, as wild wool was rare in nature before the domestication of the animals that produce it. The domestication of these species played a crucial role in the availability and development of wool as a textile fiber. Archaeological discoveries suggest that the selection of sheep for their wool began around 6000 BC, coinciding with the emergence of woven textiles. However, it is possible that the wool at that time was primarily used for felt or other purposes, as the oldest known wool garments date back 2 or 3,000 years later. The selective breeding of sheep for increased wool production and reduced hair transformed wool into a significant alternative to linen. During the time of the Roman Empire, the Mediterranean and European populations predominantly wore two types of materials, linen and wool. Cotton was still a curiosity, and silk was considered extravagant, so they were not commonly used by the majority of the population. Wool and linen complemented each other in various ways. Wool has the advantage of impeding heat transfer and serving as a good insulation material due to the bulkiness of wool fabrics resulting from their crimp. The air pockets created by the crimp contribute to thermal insulation. Linen, on the other hand, was better suited for warmer and drier climates, such as in Egypt and many parts of the Middle East. However, even in hot climates, there were situations where the property of wool to keep the outside heat away was useful. Desert-dwelling people like the Bedouins in Arabia or the Tuareg in the Sahara utilized wool clothing for insulation. Different qualities of wool were used for various products, with the finest ones reserved for clothing and coarser ones used for blankets or rugs. Each region in the Middle East and Europe developed its own wool production, from raising sheep herds to manufacturing cloth. Similarly, in different parts of the world, local species of animals were domesticated for their wool. For example, in South America, alpacas and llamas were primarily used for their coats, while in India, various sheep breeds were utilized for wool production. During the Middle Ages, the wool trade played a significant role in European commerce, while a substantial portion of wool production was conducted locally for local consumption, particularly in remote areas. The 13th century witnessed the emergence of international trade and division of labor in the industry. The Low Countries, modern-day Belgium and the Netherlands, and Italy became the two main regions for weaving and trading. Raw wool materials were sourced from various regions in Western Europe, with England being the primary producer of raw wool, followed by Spain. To a lesser extent, English wool remained the main export for centuries and played a critical role in the English economy, at least during the 17th century. Even after that, it continued to be protected. For instance, at the end of the 17th century, the English crown forbade American colonies from trading wool with anyone other than England. Furthermore, since a significant portion of the value of woolen textiles lay in the detailing and finishing, England attempted to develop its own manufacturing industry. In the 14th century, only about 10% of wool produced was transformed into textiles, but this percentage increased over the following centuries in regions where wool manufacturing and trade were significant. This industry had a major impact on economic development and the gradual emergence of capitalism. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, the wool trade became highly substantial, generating capital that could be reinvested. It also brought about changes in the organization of production in countries such as England, Italy, the Netherlands, Western Germany, and Northern France. A new class of bourgeois entrepreneurs emerged, taking control of the entire production process outside the authority of guilds or states. While there were no factories or complex machines during this period, which would come later, these entrepreneurs organized and oversaw the entire manufacturing process. They procured raw materials and provided employment to numerous individual workers or small workshops, effectively managing the various stages of production. In the cottage industry system, different individuals had distinct roles. Some spun wool into yarn, others wove it, and others dyed the textiles. The supervisors of this system purchased and provided all the necessary raw materials, paid the workers based on the pieces produced, and managed the logistics, including delivering materials and collecting the finished products. This system, known as the cottage industry in England, had a significant and long-lasting impact in regions where it was practiced. The cottage industry uplifted standards of living and was generally well received by inhabitants of rural areas. It provided an additional source of income, especially during the winter when agricultural work was limited. Moreover, it allowed for the accumulation of capital that could be invested elsewhere. Even decades prior to the Renaissance in Italy, families like the Medici in Florence built their fortunes in the wool trade. They utilized their wealth to establish the first banks and invest in various sectors. When the Industrial Revolution commenced centuries later, it is no coincidence that it initially took place in Great Britain and later expanded into parts of continental Europe. While technical innovations such as machines and the availability of raw materials were crucial ingredients for the Industrial Revolution, it's important to note that the foundation of entrepreneurial capital and spirit had already emerged long before. This readiness to invest in manufacturing projects propelled by the pursuit of profitability played a pivotal role in the transformation that unfolded during the Industrial Revolution. The historical significance of textiles, particularly wool, should not be underestimated in shaping the economic world we inhabit today. Wool played a central role in the process of capital accumulation and the restructuring of production methods, transcending its significance as a textile material. In the 19th century, the production of wool, along with cotton and other raw materials, followed a similar trajectory. It became decentralized and relocated to colonies or other parts of the world. In the case of wool, this relocation primarily occurred in countries such as Australia, which remains the largest wool producer in the world, and New Zealand. Additionally, significant wool producing countries in modern times include China and the United States. This overview mainly encompassed natural fibers used in textiles for thousands of years, although there are more fibers like jute, which is derived from plants and used in textiles such as burlap. The ones mentioned have consistently held the greatest importance. While understanding the materials, techniques, and the impact of the textile industry on shaping the world is fascinating, there is another dimension to consider: style. Well, as usual, there would be many more things to tell you, but for now we've come to the end of our little journey tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep. Or, if you're not sleepy yet, you may pick another story from my ever-growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.